Very good. Welcome everybody to our Zoom meeting tonight. I hope that everybody has had a wonderful day. We have Dr. John Tanner, who I will introduce in a moment. But just to say, I want to welcome everybody. And if this is your first time or if you're a returning member, still welcome. I want to first recognize a few people. So first to recognize our team, headed up with Paul Chatlin, and our specialized support group hosts who each lead their own monthly support group through the membership platform. As Paul Chatlin likes to say, we are together as one, and we all have, I think, our deepest thread that's common is that we just love to help people who are trying to adopt this plant-based lifestyle, or who are deep rooted maybe, or just getting started, people who need support, people who need ideas. Yeah, so that is our mission at PBNSG. My name is Peggy Krause, and I have been plant-based for 16 or 17 years now. And I came to plant-based nutrition when Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn convinced me that I did not need meat to be healthy. And a month or two later, via the China study, Dr. Campbell convinced me that I was probably poisoning my family with all their milk products. So today I am an exercise physiologist in cardiac rehab, and I teach plant-based nutrition along with exercise principles to restore cardiac health, for weight loss, for reversing diabetes. Of course, sometimes that's not always as well received as I would like it, but I plant the seed. And I take it a little further as I can. But I also have a course that teaches people how to reverse type 2 diabetes. So that is my Erasing Diabetes signature class that I do apart from my work at the hospital. So anyway, so for those of you who are new to PBNSG, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to evidence-based education and advocacy of a plant-based whole foods nutrition lifestyle to help individuals to prevent and reverse chronic disease and to achieve optimal health. We welcome you to join our member platform, and which gives you access to live virtual events, cooking demos, specialized support group meetings, and event recordings and more. So additionally, you can visit our website, pbnsg.org, to check out the calendar, to find upcoming events, to subscribe to our newsletter. You can shop our merchandise page, where you'll find the Perfectly Plant-Based Cookbook that's available as a download. And for members, it's on the products tab on the membership page. And don't forget that our free monthly virtual community support group meetings are the second Thursday of each month. Registration for the monthly meetings can be found at pbnsg.org under the support groups tab. Members also have to register there for free meetings, but not for monthly meetings or events. Okay. So I would like to introduce to you our guest today, Dr. John Tanner. And the talk tonight is, I almost died needlessly, will you? That's a catchy title. So Dr. Tanner earned his master's degree in electrical engineering and his Ph.D. in computer science from Caltech. John is founder and CEO of Tanner Research Inc. and an advanced R&D company that was named to the LA Fast 50 5 years in a row, and that develops software, electronics, and robotics. Dr. Tanner is also the founder and director of NewSci, the Nutrition Science Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to saving lives through education of nutrition science. More recently, he founded the healthy meal delivery company, Little Green Forks. So join us as Dr. Tanner will tell the story about how he thought he was healthy, and then he suffered a near-fatal cardiac arrest. And since then, he's studied intensely the causes of heart disease, which is the leading killer of our country, I'm sure that you know. To his surprise, he found that heart disease can be completely avoided through proper diet, and that cancer, stroke, diabetes, high blood pressure, and about 30 other diseases can be reduced, avoided, and reversed by the same diet. Incredible. And while the overwhelming majority of us think that we are eating healthy, we are so mistaken that about 2/3 of us will needlessly die from diseases caused by our diet. John is going to talk about the scientific information that is needed to avoid heart disease and other leading killers. And he'll talk about strategies for change that can help lead all of us down the path to a longer life and good health. Very good. John, take it away, if you will.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Thanks for that introduction. Before I jump into my slides, I want to share how I got connected to PBNSG. It's one of the key players there, as you mentioned, is Paul Chatlin. And he also, like me, suffered heart disease and nearly died, and then embraced a plant-based diet and is trying to get everybody else to eat that way so that they don't die of heart disease. And Chef AJ knew both of us, and we didn't know each other. She introduced us, and she said, you know, you need to talk to each other. And oh, by the way, John and Paul, if you could find another person with heart disease that's now plant-based, I think whose name is George, and another one named Ringo, you would be John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Maybe not the Beatles, but maybe the beaters of heart disease.
John, could I interrupt just a moment?
Sure.
I did forget this. If anybody has questions or comments, please type them into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that as John goes through his presentation tonight. All right, take it away, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I think you can see my screen. Peggy, you did a great job of introducing NewSci and Little Green Forks. Sorry, so I don't need to do that. But let me continue on. As you also introduced the title of my talk and sort of what we're going to be talking about, heart disease and other diseases, health through nutrition, and some strategies for how do we avoid these unnecessary deaths. My story begins really maybe 20 years ago when my wife turns to me one day and says, John, do you know that you have the body of a god? And I had been married to her for 20 years at that point. And I said, and she'd never said anything remotely like that. So I said, really? I have the body of a god? And she says, yes, unfortunately, the god is Buddha. Not exactly the physique to quest after, but you have to admit there's a certain resemblance here between me and Mr. Buddha here, especially around the midsection. So I took that comment to heart and decided that I needed to do something about that. So I started exercising more. I started running a mile every day. And I ran that mile. I got to where I could run it in 7 minutes, not too bad for somebody of that age. And after about 5 years of that, I had measured out a route in purple here that's almost exactly a mile to leave my house and get back to my house. And I did that 5 years with no problem. And one day after 5 years, I got to point B in my route. And I staggered a couple of steps and hit the ground unconscious with my heart stopped. This is how much warning you have of heart disease. It's a disease of the insides of your arteries. You can't see it from the outside. There's no nerve endings in there. You can think you're fine, and the next moment you're dead on the street. But I didn't die that day. I got really lucky and did survive. And after that, I started learning some things about heart disease. I learned that it's the leading killer in this country. Probably most people are aware of that. It's the leading killer of both men and women. Sometimes people think of heart disease as more of a man's disease, and at the younger ages, more men die of heart disease than women do. But at the older ages, more women die of heart disease than men. So it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you live in this country, this is the disease that's more likely to kill you than any other disease. But you may have known that already. What you may be less aware of is that sudden cardiac arrest is the most common form of heart disease. That is, your heart suddenly stops. You can have a heart attack where the heart is laboring, but it continues to beat. You can have angina or angina, which is severe chest pain where the heart is beating more or less normally, but it hurts. But of those three things, the most common is sudden cardiac arrest. And if that should happen to you outside the hospital, your chances of surviving are about 3%. So you take these three things together, the leading killer, the most common form of it, and a really low survival rate. And that means people are dropping dead all over the place. We hear in the news about famous people. It wasn't more than a few years ago that the mayor of San Francisco was just fine one day and the next day he's dead of heart disease. But it's not just famous people. It's our friends, our neighbors, our family members, our coworkers. Probably everyone knows at least one person. Probably many of us sadly know more than one person that was fine one day and the next day they're gone. So what happened to me having sudden cardiac arrest was not unusual at all. What's a little unusual is that I survived. I beat the 3% odds, and I'm still here to talk about it. And I'm very thankful for that. That day I had the cardiac arrest. They got me to the hospital, put me on the table under the X-ray machine, and they took this video of my heart. Now you can't see it too much just yet because the X-rays go right through the muscle tissue, but you can see one of my ribs here. There's another rib here, spinal column over here. And you can see this tube. Now they cut a small incision on the inside of my thigh, and they fed this catheter through my femoral artery up around the aorta, which is the big artery that comes off the top of the heart. And then they had it turn a corner into a small coronary artery that feeds blood to the heart muscle itself. Now, the heart muscle doesn't get nutrients and oxygen from the blood flowing through the middle of it that it's pumping around. It has to have its own blood supply, its own arteries, and they're somewhat small. So the doctor has maneuvered this tube into my coronary artery, and just before this video starts, he pushes a foot pedal which squirts radio-opaque dye into the end of the tube that's coming out of my leg, and that dye goes through the tube and comes out here where he can see it, and he can see how the blood flow is going through that artery that's feeding oxygen and nutrients to my muscles. So I'm about to start that. I want you to see if you think that you can see where my problem was that day. Are you maybe zooming in? Oops, right about there. Now it looks like from this frame of the video where it stopped that there's no blood getting through there. But we know there's some getting through there or we wouldn't see the dye downstream. And oh, by the way, I would have been dead. You know, the tiny little trickle of blood getting through there is what kept me alive. But you can tell that this is a big problem, and it's what almost killed me that day. And eventually, and I'll show you the data in a moment, I was forced to conclude that I did this to myself. And I'm sad to say the vast majority of Americans are in the process of doing that to themselves. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do it at all. And I hope you will choose not to cause this kind of a problem for yourself. I did survive that event, as I obviously. I was in the hospital for 5 days. The first day was a little dicey. I would wake up and I would see my wife there and I would say, honey, where am I? What happened? And she'd say, you're in the hospital, you had a heart attack. And I'd say, oh, okay. And then I'd drift off unconscious again. And a few minutes later, I'd wake up and I'd say, where am I? What happened? I had no memory of a conversation from a few minutes before. And that was because of the time my brain didn't have enough oxygen because my heart was stopped. They weren't sure I was going to come back at all. But after a few days, I could remember a conversation from a few minutes before. And after only 5 days, they sent me home. They said, don't go back to work just yet. So I took another week off from work. But after 2 weeks, I went from dead on the street to back to work. I thought that was pretty good. But they said, don't go back to running just yet. We need to do some other tests. And of the 3% who survive cardiac arrest, most of them have residual heart muscle damage or brain damage or both. I seem to be lucky in the brain damage part, although when I forget my anniversary, I say, oh, honey, it was the heart attack, really. That's a great excuse for senior moments. But they needed to see whether my heart muscle was permanently damaged. So they did a test called perfusion test, but it came back negative. My heart looked pretty good. So the doctor said to me, you can go back to your life the way it was. And he meant this in a very positive way. You can forget about this trauma that has just turned your life upside down right now. And at first I took it the way he intended as a comforting thing, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought my life the way it was, if that life includes cardiac arrest, I don't want to go back there. And this led me to ask a whole bunch of questions. Was my life the way it was the cause? I had no idea. What does cause heart disease, and can it be prevented or reversed? And these questions really consumed me. My cardiologist was not actually very useful. He would say things like, well, it's the leading killer in this country. What do you expect? Lots of people get it. That doesn't tell me why I got it and how I can prevent it. Eventually, I found my way to this book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn. I suspect many of you listening here probably aware of that gentleman and his book. But it has some really interesting things to say. He says nearly half the people in the US will suffer heart disease. That's a lot. Not all half will die of it, but will suffer from it. Wow. He says you should know your cholesterol levels, both total and LDL, and you should also know what healthy numbers are. He says your total cholesterol should be below 150 milligrams per deciliter, and your LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, should be below 80 milligrams per deciliter. He says if your numbers are below this, with some caveats that they're not there artificially because of medications you're taking, but if you're naturally below these numbers, you're not going to have a heart attack. But most Americans are above these numbers, many of them way above these numbers. He goes on to say, if you're not below these numbers, fix the problem yourself. Doctors cannot fix this problem. This is a doctor saying that doctors cannot fix the leading killer in this country. These two statements together are either awesome or terrible, depending on what kind of a person you are. If you're the kind of person who wants to just do whatever they want in life, and if something goes wrong from a health standpoint, you'll go to the doctor and they'll fix it, this is bad news, because the doctor can't fix the leading killer. But if you're the kind of person who wants to take charge of your life, you want to decide for yourself whether you're going to be healthy or sick. You want to decide for yourself whether you're going to live a long time or cut your life short. This is awesome because it's under your control. Great. But if you don't fix the problem yourself, the medical establishment has lots of things that they would have you do or do to you. First, they'll prescribe medications. These are called statin drugs. The trade names are Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor. They don't work very well. I'll have statistics for you in a minute. And they have harmful side effects, and we'll talk about that too. But that's what the doctors would have you do. The next thing they'll want to put in stents. These are these metal mesh tubes that they insert through your artery and then inflate once inside to sort of mash the debris out of the way. That's what they did to me. We do, I think this number is higher now. I think it's maybe over 1 million a year in this country. They don't cure heart disease. You didn't develop this clog in your artery because of a lack of stent. It has another cause. So the stents don't fix it. Next thing the doctors would have you do or do to you is bypass surgery. It's called coronary artery bypass graft, CABG, sometimes called CABG or just bypass surgery. We do more than 500,000 of these a year in this country, and they don't cure it. We spend $10 billion, not million, but $1 billion a year on the statins. We add in the stents and the bypass surgeries. We spend $50 billion a year on these interventions that don't cure heart disease. But diet can prevent and reverse heart disease. Now, why don't we know this? I think one of the main reasons is we can't directly experience the result of what our food choices are. Once that food goes past your lips, you don't know what goes on inside. Let me show you a couple of video clips here that start to give you a clue. This is Dr. Michael Clapper, a great guy. He's talking here about these 2 blood samples that are given by 2 different patients. And usually when they take a blood sample, they either spin it in a centrifuge or they let it sit quite a while. So it separates into its different components so they can see each one individually. And so they've done that with the samples from these 2 patients. Now, they also tell the patients, don't eat anything for 10 or 12 hours before you give the blood for the test. Now, the patient who gave the sample on the left here adhered to that guideline. The patient who gave the sample on the right, not so much.
Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake.
Now, if at some point in your life you've had a cheeseburger and a milkshake, not to worry. Your body is pretty awesome. It clears that junk away. It gets in your bloodstream, that gooey stuff, very quickly after you eat it. But after 10 or 12 hours, your body clears it away. But what do most Americans do before their body has had a chance to clear that away? They eat some more stuff just like it. So they end up coating the insides of their arteries with this gooey stuff 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even then, your body is amazing. It does its best to clear that away. It can't do a perfect job, but it keeps trying. And it does a good enough job that you may not even notice for quite a while. For me, it took 52 years before it caught up with me, but it does eventually catch up to you. Let's see what the inside of this guy's arteries look like after his long diet. Now, we don't know that he ate cheeseburgers every day, but we might guess that this wasn't his first one on his way to the cardiac lab. So after years of eating this stuff, let's have a look at those arteries.
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
So I urge you to keep this picture in your mind the next time you're reaching for a cheeseburger or a milkshake. This is what you're doing to the inside of you. And you also need to understand that this surgery that they did doesn't fix him. These deposits, this yellow cholesterol deposit, they don't actually form on the inner wall of the artery. They form just inside, just beyond the skin of the inner skin of the artery. And in order to pull these out, they also have to pull out the lining of this guy's artery, which actually makes him less healthy, really damages the artery. So they don't do this kind of operation anymore. So surgery is not an option to fix this problem. Let's talk about cholesterol blood tests. Cholesterol is a natural substance. There's some of it that's supposed to be in your blood. Your liver produces it and your body needs a certain amount of it, a certain type of cholesterol. And usually your liver knows how much and what type to produce. The other source of cholesterol in your bloodstream are the animal products you eat. There are no plant products whatsoever that contain cholesterol. Most animal products do. So, but even then, the level of cholesterol that's in your blood at the moment is not what causes death. It's the elevated cholesterol over a long period of time that is the problem. And they have found that measuring this level in your blood is an indicator of how likely you are to die of heart disease. The Framingham Heart Study established the correlation of high cholesterol blood tests with heart attacks and death. And under some conditions, and I'll say most conditions with one big exception, this marker is an effective diagnostic tool. What does that mean? It means you go ahead and get your blood test. And if your cholesterol is over 150 in your LDL or your LDL is over 80, you've got a problem. And if it's a lot higher than those numbers, you've got a big problem. The one exception is medications that can artificially lower this. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But what is the right number? You know, I'm a patient of Kaiser Permanente, and when I get my blood test measurement back, my cholesterol test, it comes back and it says, here's your number, and here's the standard number of 200. And I asked Kaiser, you know, but the healthy number is 150. What is the standard number? And they said, oh, well, we get that from the American Heart Association. So I contacted them and they said, where do you get this 200 number as standard? They said, well, it's roughly the average of all Americans. Okay, that's a number that's average among a group of people whose leading cause of death is heart disease. You don't want to be average, you want to be healthy, and 200 is not that. So don't believe that this is okay. The Framingham Heart Study found that 1/3 of the people with heart disease had cholesterol between 150 and 200. So saying you're below 200 doesn't mean you're healthy. I'm a great example of that. I had cholesterol of 188, and then with no other risk factors, had a heart attack that nearly killed me. So if somebody's trying to tell you that 200 is okay, I beg to differ. The June 2010 study that I found shows that the statin drugs break the correlation between the blood test measurement and your likelihood of death. That is, when you take these medications, Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor, the cholesterol blood test goes down, but you still die nearly as often. Let me give you an example of a similar sort of thing. Suppose you're driving your car and the red check engine light comes on. You know that the red light isn't the problem, but it's an indicator there's a problem somewhere else. But you know that the indicator is serious, so you better get your car checked quick. So you take it into the mechanic, and the next day the mechanic returns it to you and the check engine light is off, and you think, hey, fixed it. Then if you happen to look behind the dashboard and you found the wires going to the red check engine light and they looked like this, you may conclude that in fact the mechanic didn't fix the problem. He just disabled the indicator, making you think he fixed the problem. And you would be really angry with that auto mechanic if you found that. Well, don't let the statin drugs fool you in the same way. Just because you take the drugs and your cholesterol blood test goes down, don't believe that you're okay. Now, what are these statin drugs actually doing? They're inhibiting the liver's natural production of cholesterol. They're not doing anything about the cholesterol that got into your body because of the animal products you ate, the unnatural stuff that you really would be better off without. These drugs are inhibiting your liver's natural production of the cholesterol that's supposed to be in your body. So is it any surprise that these drugs don't really do much. Oh, by the way, what does it mean to interfere with or inhibit the liver's natural production of cholesterol? These drugs are liver poisons. They are toxins to your liver intentionally introduced to screw up the way the liver normally works. What are the side effects? Top of the list, liver problems. It used to be that they would, the medications, statins would say, if you take this medication for any length of time, you should take a standard liver test. And if that liver test shows damage, you should discontinue the use of this medications. Well, they don't say that anymore because the standard liver test can't detect the damage caused by these statin drugs. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. Muscle soreness is another common side effect of statin drugs. And finally, brain damage. Let me say more about what I mean by damage. This is a set of symptoms that look a lot like Alzheimer's. And those of you who know a little bit about Alzheimer's disease, you know it's a degradation of mental capability. And we know of nothing on the planet right now that can reverse Alzheimer's. Well, they're finding a lot of people, often older people, are prescribed these statin drugs. And then they show a set of symptoms that include cognition problems, short-term memory loss, concentration issues, and they tentatively diagnose them with Alzheimer's. You can't really know for sure if somebody's got Alzheimer's until they die, and then you do an autopsy of their brain. But they say, well, they probably have Alzheimer's. What they're finding, if these people, they take them off their cholesterol blood test, the statin drugs, they get better. They get this mental function back, which means it was not Alzheimer's, because that doesn't come back. It was caused by the statin drugs. Now, I bet everybody on this that's listening here today is really smart, and they have lots of extra brain cells, so they can maybe spare a few to get killed by the statins. I don't. I need every one of my brain cells working. So this is the most serious problem that for me with statin drugs. As I started studying this heart disease, and I would go to conferences, I'd talk to the experts, I'd read the medical journals, I came across at different times 5 different papers, research papers that were very interesting to me. And you know it's a good science when they give you the statistics, not just for what happens when you treat people, but you also take almost exact same set of people and don't treat them so that you can compare the two groups. So for each of these studies, I scaled the red bar here so that the baseline untreated group was 100%. And then we can compare the results of these other studies. So the first one of these came from Duke University, where for years they would have people come into their medical center and be candidates for stents. And they would arbitrarily decide half of them would get stents and half of them wouldn't get stents. And they'd track both groups for years afterwards to see how many of each group died. So eventually they published the paper. I took 2 numbers out of it. What's the death rate per patient for the people that didn't get treated? And I scaled that to 100%. What's the death rate for the group of people who did get the stents? Now, if stent is a highly effective treatment, lots more people would live, and you'd see a red bar that was much, much lower. There it is. What this says is 97% of the people that would die without getting a stent still die. It barely moves the needle at all in terms of increasing lifespan. Almost totally ineffective. Well, the next study came along. They reported 2 groups of people. One gets statin drugs and the other doesn't. And let's look at their blood tests after a period of time. The group that got the drugs, their blood test was dramatically down compared to the group that didn't get the statins. Yay. Ladies and gentlemen, statin drugs work. They work to lower the blood test measurement. Is that what we care about? We only care about the blood test measurement if it's a reliable indicator of likelihood of death. So let's look not at the indicator, let's look at the actual death rate. So this next study, this is the June 2010 study that I mentioned before. They took 65,000 patients. Half of them got the statin drugs, half of them didn't. They tracked both groups for a long period of time. What's their death rate? Here's the death rate for the group that didn't get the statin drugs. Here's the death rate for the group that did, 91%. Now, I can't say that there's no benefit from statin drugs, although the author of this paper said, within the error bounds of this study, we can't conclude any benefit from statin drugs. But I'll say mathematically, the most likely is 9% reduction in death. But that means 91% of the people that would die without the drugs still die. So not a very effective. And what really tweaks me about this, in order to, you could say, well, that 9% is important because 500,000 people a year in this country die of heart disease. So saving 9%, that's 45,000 people. Well, let's save them, sure. But if the other 455,000 people that were going to die anyway, so what if they have liver problems and mental problems and so on, because they're dead anyway? The problem is we don't know which 500,000 people are going to die this year. So to get that 45,000 lives saved, we have to have tens of millions of Americans taking statins and having liver damage and mental problems and muscle soreness. Not great. And what's really, again, annoys me about this is the doctors present this as the treatment, and it's going to fix you. And, there's no need to look anywhere else. Well, let's look at a couple of other studies. This next one comes from the UK. It's called the EPIC study, and it looked at what people eat. And they eat pretty much like we do, a lot of meat and dairy over in the UK. But like here, there's a small fraction of people that just choose to not eat meat. They're vegetarians. Vegetarian may still eat animal products. They may eat eggs and milk and cheese, but just no animal products. Well, they asked lots of people these questions, what do you eat? And then they tracked them for years to see what their death rate was due to heart disease. They found that the vegetarians had this death rate relative to the 100%. Now, if you look at this red bar, well, there's still a lot of people dying of heart disease that are vegetarian. But and maybe that's not that different than this red bar. But if you look not at the red bars, but the white above, this is the amount of lives saved. This is more than 3 times as effective as statin drugs, just cutting meat out of your diet. Wow. But there's one more study I want to tell you about. There was a preliminary form of this that showed up in the book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. I found it extremely fascinating, but it only involved about 18 patients. And the author of that book was criticized for assuming that the study would apply to more people. And so he did a bigger study and published that a few years later in a medical journal. It involved 200 patients. Each of these patients they would bring into the doctor's office one at a time, and the doctor would say, I really want you to eat this particular way. And we'll say what that is in just a moment. But for now, just call it the ideal diet. It involves eating certain things and avoiding other things. And the doctor said, this is really going to make a big difference to you. And 90% of the patients said, yep, doc, I'm in. I'm going to really do what you say. The other 10% said, nah, you're asking me to give up foods that I really love. I'm not willing to do it. Okay, continue to eat the way you were, but stay in the study. So this is now our control group. And they tracked both groups of patients for years, eventually published the data. And they tracked not only deaths due to heart disease, but 4 other cardiac events, which is a heart attack that didn't result in death, angina, a stent emplacement, or bypass surgery. So they presented the tally of those 5 cardiac events, cardiac event rate per patient for the group that continued to eat the way they always had. I scaled that to 100%. And then I applied the same scaling to the cardiac event rate for the group that switched this ideal diet. I'm going to show you the height of that red bar in just a moment. But before I do, I want to ask each person who's listening to this to think, how low does that red bar need to go before it's important to you? I think you'd all agree that it has to go below the vegetarian bar. If this red bar is higher, well, we don't want to do that. We'll do the vegetarian thing. So it needs to go below, but how much lower before it's important? Ready to see the height of the red bar? Here it is. 1%. Essentially, all heart disease goes away if you eat properly. Wow. It is this data that convinced me, well, what's the logical inverse of this? If you eat properly, you don't have heart disease. The inverse is, if you have heart disease, you're not eating properly. Therefore, if you have heart disease, it's your fault. This is the study that proved to me conclusively that that clog that you saw earlier in my heart was my fault. Didn't know better, didn't know, nobody told me what to eat, but still I was eating the wrong things. Here's some pictures from that book of another patient. Here's one who had not just one clog like I did, he had this whole section of his coronary artery clogged. And he didn't really have a choice. They couldn't stent this. And so they just put him on this diet. And 2.5 years later, they took another picture of that same artery. It is cured. The body has an amazing ability to repair itself if you quit abusing it 3 times a day with your meals. So here's this guy's artery later. He is cured. Yay. So what is this ideal diet? Well, let's start with the things that are killing us. Red meat, beef, you knew that. Everybody knows that. It's been in the news for decades now about how harmful this is. What you may not be aware of is that pork, chicken, and fish are just as bad. Fish has a special problem we'll talk about in a moment. Dairy is considered by many experts to be even worse. We're talking about milk, cheese, butter, ice cream. What is wrong with all these things? They have animal protein in them, which is inflammatory. Animal protein is bad for us. And they also have animal fat. Once you've inflamed the insides of your arteries and caused damage to them with the protein, then the fat has a way of working its way into your arteries walls, which causes you long-term problems. Same with eggs. They have animal protein and animal fat. Another harmful set of foods are, I showed the donut there, but it's a placeholder for processed foods that can be a whole lot of things: cookies, candies, sugary breakfast cereals, donuts, pastries, that kind of stuff. Those are not good for us. And here's a surprise to many people: vegetable oil is not good for us. And vegetable oil is sneaky in that it gets into all kinds of products, including chips of all kinds, crackers, lots of salad dressings, fake butters, and even products like granola bar that you think would be healthy it's got oil in it. Now, that I'm not saying you should never eat any of these things, but the science is saying very, very clearly, if you continue to eat these things, the most likely thing that will happen to you is heart disease and you in the casket before your time. Your choice. Or you can instead choose to eat these things: colorful vegetables of all kinds, emphasis on leafy greens, fruits in moderation, beans are awesome, whole grains, including corn, oatmeal, brown rice. White rice is okay, brown is better. Whole wheat, not that processed white stuff, but whole wheat. Potatoes are awesome nutritionally. The problem with potatoes in this country is you take a healthy potato and you cook it in oil, and it's unhealthy. You have this nice, wonderfully baked potato, and you slather it with butter or sour cream or cheese. You've just made it unhealthy. But the potato itself is very healthy. Even more so, sweet potatoes. There are societies on this planet that eat nothing but sweet potatoes. They don't have heart disease. So I'm not telling you that you should only eat these foods, but I'm saying if you do, the science is really, really clear what's likely to happen to you, which is living 14 to 20 more years, depending on the study you look at. And then, so in your old age, the closest you'll come to the grave is when you run through and you see the gravestones of the people who ate the stuff on the previous slide. Now, what may be more important to you than those extra years is the quality of those years. In this country, the average number of years of disability before death, I think, is running around 9 years. And so, but this diet eliminates most of the causes of this disability, ranging from heart attacks, strokes, arthritis, diabetes, those things that that cripple you and give you pain go away. So you can, if you are the standard American, you'll have 9 years of really crummy life and then die. But if you go on this diet, you'll have 9 years of really productive, happy, joyful years, followed by 14 to 20 more of those productive, joyful years. Your call based on what you choose to eat. The researchers call this diet a low-fat, whole plant diet. You may hear the word vegan, and this is definitely vegan, but there's a lot of vegan junk foods, high-fat, high-processed foods. So the researchers tend to call this low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. It consists of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, no meat or fish. This is just in words what you saw in pictures on the previous slide. No eggs or dairy products, no oils, including olive oil. That's not a whole food. No processed foods. And the low fat comes in here. You really want less than 10% of your calories from fat. Now, you could try to hit this target by carefully measuring all of your calories that you eat all day long and what percentage of those are fat. But an easier way is to just say, well, I've gotten rid of all the animal products and oils where a lot of the fat came from. And there's just a few more problematic whole plant foods that are too fat. Those are nuts and seeds, coconut and avocados. Notice this guideline is in gray. It's not quite as strong as the other recommendations. And the asterisk says that if you're totally healthy in all ways, you can safely have a little bit of nuts, coconut, and avocado. That is, if your cholesterol is under 150, your LDL is under 80, with no medications, your blood pressure is 120 over 80 or below with no medications, your blood sugar is 100 or below with no medications, and your body mass index says you're in the normal range, you can have some slivered almonds on your salad, no problem. But it doesn't mean you can take a 16-ounce jar of Planters peanuts and eat it in front of the TV all in one go. That's not healthy for anybody. Coconut, you could, if you're totally healthy, you can have a little bit of slivers of shavings of coconut on a dessert or an entree. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to avoid ice cream, so I'm going to eat instead that frozen dessert that is made up of almost all coconut oil, which is 90 or 95% saturated fat. That's not healthy for anybody. Again, if you're totally healthy, a few slices of avocado on your salad are fine. Making a quart of guacamole and eating it all in one go, that's not okay for anyone. Also, you want to be cautious with soy products. Whole soybeans are fine. So soy milk, tempeh, tofu, and edamame, those are fine. But the fake vegan meats that are made from heavily processed soy, you really want to avoid those. And be careful with fruit juice. A little bit is okay, but replacing that 42-ounce big gulp of Coca-Cola with 42 ounces of fruit juice and drinking it down, not so healthy. Now, you may look at this and say, no meat, no dairy, this is extreme diet. Well, Caldwell Esselstyn, the author of the book, he says, some people think whole food plant-based diet is extreme. 500,000 people a year will have their chests opened up and a vein taken from their leg and sewn onto their coronary artery. Some people would call that extreme. So imagine, if you will, if you eat the wrong foods and they have to open up your chest. This is a buzzsaw that's cutting open your chest bone, and how horrible that is. And then you might say, getting rid of that burger and eating some more broccoli instead, maybe that's not so extreme. Don't have time today to talk about cancer, but here's one of the top nutrition researchers in the world. He says, casein, the main protein of cow's milk, is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. Carcinogen means cancer-causing substance. Wow. Talking about diabetes, here's some data that shows that people that consume more milk, which is along the horizontal axis here, have greater incidence of type 1 diabetes. So you really want to avoid milk if you want to avoid type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a different disease than type 1, and type 2 is really where the big problem is today. It's often thought of as being caused by eating carbohydrates, not the case. It's caused by eating fat, and then the fat gets into the muscle cells and interferes with their ability to take in glucose from the blood. And that glucose is supposed to be in the blood, but if it can't go into the cells, then it just gets more and more sticky, and that causes all kinds of problems with you because you ate too much fat. And it results in amputations, blindness, and a painful death. Medications don't do much for you. Here's a guy's foot that he has diabetic gangrene in his foot. Shortly after this picture was taken, they had to amputate the foot. So this is how the disease progresses. You can take the diet recommended by the American Diabetes Association. That helps a little bit. But if you eat the ideal diet that we've already talked about, research shows that it is 3 times better at reducing your diabetes. And that's usually the difference between the disease continuing and being cured. So with this diet, the cure usually occurs within 2 to 4 weeks of adopting this ideal diet. Here's Dr. Dean Ornish from Northern California, who's been reversing heart disease and diabetes for, I think, 30 years now. He says, think about it. Heart disease and diabetes are completely preventable by making comprehensive lifestyle changes without drugs or surgery. Wow. Hypertension is another word for high blood pressure, also caused by the same bad American diet. In this case, the restrictions in your arteries cause your heart to pump harder, which makes it wear out quicker, shortening your life. Medications lower the blood pressure, but it doesn't solve the root problem, which is the damage you've caused to the insides of your artery. But diet solves it in a couple of different time scales. Some of it happens very quickly. So if you decide that you're going to get rid of your high blood pressure problem by switching to this diet, be ready to taper off your medications. Because if you fix your problem, lowering your blood pressure with diet, and then you continue on the meds that lower it even further, that can cause you to pass out. And if you're driving a car when that happens, that could be fatal. So by all means, get rid of your blood pressure problem, but be ready to taper off your meds fairly quickly. The Center for Disease Control publishes what the top 15 causes of death were. I took those 15 death causes and sorted them into this pie chart, organized by which ones are caused by our diet. And not all of them are. You know, if on the best diet, you can still have accident, suicide, and murder. But if you combine the causes of death that are caused by our unhealthy food, it's about 2/3. Wow. This is 1.3, 1.5 million Americans die every year because they're eating the wrong foods. This also means if you and 2 of your loved ones, or all 3 of you, eating the wrong foods, standard American diet, sad to say, statistically, two of the 3 of you are going to die needlessly. I urge you to not let that happen. So the right diet can prevent, reduce, or reverse a whole bunch of different diseases. Every time I go to a medical research conference, I come back with 2 or 3 more diseases that go away, or knowledge of these diseases that go away with the same diet. Yay. Really quickly, biomagnification. Just want to touch on this. This is a process whereby toxins get concentrated as you move up the food chain. Imagine, if you will, a little patch of grass, and there's this little bit of toxin. I showed it right there as this black dot. I don't know if you can see that. It's right there. And it's somewhere in that grass. And maybe this is a natural toxin, but most likely it's a man-made chemical. of some sort. And then the cow comes and eats that grass, and that toxin goes into the cow's body. And the next day they eat some more grass, and the next day more grass. So this toxin, one of the things that makes a toxin toxic is the body's inability to get rid of it. So this builds up over the cow's lifetime. So by the time it gets to your plate in the form of meat or dairy, it has concentrated in the cow somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times. So instead of one little dot that may not be so harmful to the cow, you've got a lot more of them that may very well be harmful to you. What's another situation is in oceans. There's your little dot of toxin. It gets drawn into the green plants. And then along comes krill or little fish that eat the green plants. So by the time they are mature, they have been eating these toxins for their entire life. So they've got this buildup of 100 to 1,000 times the toxin level in their body. And then along comes the salmon or the tuna and eats the little fish. And by the time they're mature, they've built up 100 to 1,000 times the toxin level in their diet, which is already 100 to 1,000 times was in the water. So by the time it gets to your plate in the form of something you will eat, it's 1,000 to 1,000,000 times the toxin level. This is mid-range. The high end of the range is more like this, 1,000,000 times. I ran into a study that showed that they found some salmon that were not 1,000,000 times, but 9,000,000 times the toxin level in the water that they were swimming in. So that would be more like this. So there's not a question as to whether you'll get toxins with your fish. There's a question is, will you get a little bit of fish with all the toxins? And it can get even worse than that. I found a report that said 1/3 of all fish caught worldwide are used as feed for livestock. So they're taking this stuff that's already built up hugely in terms of toxin level, and then they're feeding it to the chickens and pigs and cows, so it can get magnified even more in what you eat. How are you going to avoid all these toxins? Just don't eat any animal products. Here's my steps to long life and health. Learn all you can. You need to be smarter than your doctor. Most of them get very little in medical school that teaches them about nutrition and its role in our major killers in this country. Once you learn everything you can, make the change. Sorry, there's likely to be challenges, but with perseverance, you can overcome them. And then at some point, I ask you to help others through these 3 steps. Here's some things I've been doing to try to help. Here's my webpage for the Nutrition Science Foundation, newsci.org. I've tried to gather some resources there, including recipes. There's a doctor directory if you want to find one of the few doctors who really understand the role of nutrition in health. If you need success stories, some testimonials to help encourage you to do what you need to do, we have both written and video success stories on the website. And if you want to help us reach out to others, we love a monetary donation. Here's a couple of ways that you can proceed to, these are strategies for getting your life where you want it. You can do it yourself. You can read one of the books that I recommend on my website. Take your medical measurements, do a trial of eating plants so you find foods that you really like that are healthy. If you're doing cooking yourself, experiment with which ones these healthy foods you can cook. Do a 90-day challenge. Eat only these healthy plants. If you can't do 90 days, do 60. If you can't do 60, do 30, but nothing else. No animal products or oils. And then at the end of that time, take your medical measurements again. If you find your weight is down, your cholesterol is down, your blood sugar is down, your energy is up, then this might be something you can do forever. And at some point along the way, please help others along this same path. Another possibility is order healthy food from our Little Green Forks food service. We deliver throughout the continental US. It's all whole food, no oil, fresh greens and fruits delivered 5 days a week. There's lots of different choices. And we also have a 30-day program for people just starting into the plant-based world that have significant diabetes, high cholesterol. We can provide a discount for 30 days if people commit to eating only Little Green Forks food for 30 days. If that's the case for you, please contact Little Green Forks. Here are some of my favorite dishes: a bean oatmeal burger with fries. Fries are not cooked in oil. Sweet potato bowl, salads, soups, ethnic dishes including pad thai. Here's a sweet potato pudding that tastes just like pumpkin pie. Those are some of my favorites. So where am I at now? This is where I was in 2001. Weight and glucose, cholesterol, LDL. Here's where I am now. I dropped a lot of weight. Glucose, I'm no longer pre-diabetic, but normal. My cholesterol is well below 150. My LDL is well below 80. What I like most about this picture is, notice I found these same pair of shorts after all these years in my drawer. See this length of this belt hanging out here? This is where it was before, and here is now. Significant difference. Here's a coupon code that you can use if you order Little Green Forks food. This is PBNSG 15 new. If you enter that into the order page when you're ordering food from Little Green Forks the first time, you'll get $15 off an order of $30 or more. Again, this presentation is brought to you by NewSci and Little Green Forks, and of course, PBNSG. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tanner. That was fabulous. It really was. It was organized. It was eye-opening. You gave practical tips for us to follow, to get started or to continue. I love the support, and I love the Little Green Forks. So you'll hear from me. We'll see if we can maybe get some of my patients to start with that. I'm going to check the chat. I didn't see anything before, but go ahead and type your comments into the chat. While we're waiting, I have just a couple of comments, questions. I have to ask, how is it that you found that the day on your run that you went down, right, with cardiac arrest, and you wound up in the hospital? What happened in that time? Who found you, and how did you get to the hospital?
Oh, that's great. There were 17 people that day, and it took me some time to go back and find them all and thank them personally. But it started as I was running by a neighbor, 4 or 5 blocks away. I didn't know them before this. Afterwards, they became my good friends. But the lady of the house, her son was born on her birthday, and he was I think just like 1 year old, or not very old, but they were celebrating the combination of her birthday and the son's birthday. And that caused grandparents to come from the East Coast. Grandma saw me go down, called to her husband, Grandpa, who had learned CPR in some way. And he came out and instantly gave me chest compressions.
Wow.
The lady of the house called 911. They were there in 4 minutes. They're not too far away. We know it was 4 minutes because they looked at my watch, and my watch said 6 minutes, because I started it when I started my run, and I was 2 minutes into my run when I went down. So they were there right away. They attached a defibrillator, which gave me a shock. They a few minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They had a heart monitor that showed that I had STEMI, ST elevated myocardial infarction, which tells them in the field what coronary artery was problematic. They called that into the hospital. The ambulance guys were there and transported me, whisked me up through the emergency room into the location where they put a stent in. And sadly, when I first saw the footage of them putting the stent in, and I didn't include it in this talk, but you saw the scene before they put the stent in. You could see the clog. Then they put the stent in, and it pushes the clog out of the way, and the blood flow just opens up. And I thought, when I saw that video, these people saved my life. But then I saw the statistics, and it does almost nothing. So, and oh, by the way, that stent failed in 3 months. and I had to go back and get 3 more stents. And one of those failed. It took 9 years, but then I had to go back and get 3 more stents. And my last time, sorry, this is going a bit off on a tangent, but my last time in, I sought out a particular doctor, Columbus Batiste. I don't know if you know that name, but he's very strong in the plant-based world, but he's also very good in the operating room. And as he looked through the camera in my catheter, he said, John, and I asked if I could be conscious while he's doing this. He says, John, you have the arteries of a young man. Because at this point, I'd been eating plant-based for 10 years, except where the stent was. The stents cause scar tissue to form. That's why they fail. And he said, the scar tissue is rubbery. You can't even just push it out of the way with a new stent. First, he had to cut incisions in this rubbery interior of my artery in order to get another stent inside to expand, to get me some blood flow. So he's doing the best he can to fix a problem that the doctor created the first time he put in the first stent. So I urge everyone, don't get the first stent. Now, if you're unconscious on the operating table, you're going to have no choice like I did. They just put a stent in. But if you have a choice, don't get the stent. It doesn't help your survival rate much, and it can cause a lot of problems downstream, as I have found. But in between the times that I'm having to have these stents, I have a great life. I now run 3 miles a day, 5K every morning. I play in a softball league. I'm 65 years old, and I'm loving life.
Excellent. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Dr. Tanner. This has really been, it's been terrific for me. I'm sure that our participants got a great information as well. Yeah, this is a great story. Thank you for sharing details. There was someone who had come and gone. She can't wait to catch more on the replay. So thank you. And again, the littlegreenforks.com, what an offer that is to get that discount using the discount code. I typed it in the chat. And I believe if anybody's watching this on the replay, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that we watch on the replay, it's just easier to watch at your own convenience. So please, if you have questions for PBNSG or for Dr. Tanner, we can forward them to him. Please, I typed it also in the chat, but the email would be connect@pbnsg.org. So it's CONNECT, connect@pbnsg.org. And Dr. Tanner, do you have any final remarks?
I just want to thank you, Peggy. Not only your practice, but what you're doing here with PBNSG and this podcast. It's just amazing work. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on today. Thank you.
It was wonderful having you, and thank you for everybody who's participating or in the future listening on the replay. Good night, everybody.